The February 14th school shooting in Parkland, Florida, where 17 people died, has thrust school security and school safety into the national spotlight ever since. I'm Tim Kremer, Executive Director of the New York State School Boards Association, and on this week's edition of Newsmakers, I will be discussing school safety with two experts in their field. Lee Mendel is the CEO of Intralogic Solutions, a company that specializes in building security, and Stephen Skrynecki, the Police Chief of Southampton, located on Long Island. Gentlemen, welcome. What's the state of school safety across New York today?
Well, I got to say, working with a lot of the New York State school districts, we're in very good shape. After these events happened, after Sandy Hook happened, I always say things change. People contact us and say, what can we do to improve? How can we get things better? And we always tell people, you got to slow it down a little bit. You got to organize. You really got to see what's happening. You can't just go running around spending money on technology without having a plan. You got to really organize. I just hope that after these recent events at Parkland, we don't see the complacency set back in again like we did after Sandy Hook. But in general,
Are you worried about that?
I am, because we saw that after Sandy Hook. We saw a lot of people running around to scramble to see what they can do to make their community feel comfortable, to see what's happening, and then we got complacent again. I'm really hoping this one hit close to home, Parkland, and I'm hoping we're going to see a big change, and I see that already.
Chief, what do you think? Are we in a safe place these days?
I think we are. We are clearly in a state of heightened awareness, heightened concern. The last couple of events have clearly brought us to new levels of concentration on how we approach these issues. I think chiefs across the state right now, myself included, are probably more connected to their school districts than ever before. We're working with technology companies, we're working with school officials, and we're looking at our strategies, trying to make sure that they're all coordinated to give us the best response, to give us the best preparation that we can possibly have.
What's changed between previous years? Because I certainly don't remember this conversation being so intense and this involvement of police in schools had never been as intense as it is today. What's changed between then and now?
Well, yeah, a lot of things have changed, but clearly society has changed in the last 20 to 30 years, and the changes that come with media, social media, introduction into society has caused a number of dynamics within our populations, and the schools are not excluded from that. So it's very easy now to bully somebody in a school where in your time and my time it was a face-to-face thing that probably didn't happen that often. Now it's happening constantly. So there's so many things that are different in the social fabric inside of a school today than that was not there years ago. And then you have everything else that's going on outside the school in our society that's driving some violent acts to higher degrees than we've seen in the past. And once again, if it's outside the school, it's going to probably be inside the school. We in law enforcement recognize that what's happening inside the classroom or inside the school is relatively the same as what's happening in the community. So it's really a matter of coordinating with school officials, and school officials recognizing that their problems in school are our problems out of school, and how can we work together to address that. And a lot that comes into play is identifying people that may be disruptive and trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit and cater to the needs of that situation, whether it's an individual's needs or it's a situational climate that needs to be addressed.
Lee, you've been a self-proclaimed techie for a long time. I don't know, where did your first technical experiences, were they with schools right from the get-go?
Well, my first technical experience, I was this tall, and I've been into technology my whole life. I grew up on technology. We got on the state contract in 2004, which was the best thing that ever happened for us, and we got introduced to the school market, and it was a market that we'd never worked with before.
You're talking about Intralogic?
Intralogic, yeah.
Okay.
And when Intralogic got on the state contract, we started working with the schools and really seeing some of their needs, some of the challenges.
You've been working with them since 2004?
Yeah, 2004.
Okay, I didn't know you went that far back.
Yep, been around a little bit, and we really kind of saw some of the challenges challenges that schools had. Schools are unique environments, as we know. We have budget constraints, we have legal constraints, we have to really do things a different way, in a different organizational way. There's different people involved, multiple buildings. So we came up with technology that really automates the response. And our partnership with law enforcement has been tremendous. Like the chief said, really sharing that data is the key. So we started with doing video surveillance in schools, cameras, card access systems. We then got into really looking at what happens during a lockdown or an emergency. What we call our response, and our 4 points of automated response is how do we respond and what's going to happen. So we realize obviously seconds truly do matter when you have situations like this.
Absolutely.
We built our one-button lockdown system, which really ties all the technology together and shares the data with law enforcement.
What are some of the things that you've been able to benefit from, and your team has been able to benefit from Lee's work?
Well, you're exactly on point when we think about responding. But before we think about responding, we should probably talk just briefly about two things that both Lee and I agree are important before we worry about the response. And the first one is the target hardening, and that's where technologies can really come into play, where you can really make a school safe from the intruder, and get that leg up to prevent the act from happening if somebody's intent on doing it. The second piece, which I think is critical, is information sharing. So we've seen in the past in almost every one of these situations that somebody knows about the event before it's going to happen, or at least has an idea. In some cases, they've told authorities, and authorities have been able to do something to intervene. In fact, that's happening around the state all the time now. In my jurisdiction, just in the last 6 weeks, we've had 3 cases where we've had information, we've been able to work that up and intervene before we've had a problem.
So this is somebody has overheard somebody talking, or they saw something on the internet, something that said, see something, I'm going to say something.
Exactly. Or I like to take that one step further. If you know something, sometimes when you say see something, you think in terms of a physical bag in the wrong place. But sometimes you overhear a conversation. You see something on the social media. You see it on a notebook. You see it in a bathroom wall.
Yep.
The schools, I think today, and one of the things we're trying to drive home in my area, is schools need to open up avenues of communication so that students feel free to come forward with that information, and that they're encouraged and understand that coming forward with that information could save their own life. So it's critical that we develop that communication flow from student or anybody, might be a parent who has information, to the school, from the school to law enforcement, or from person to law enforcement to the school. But all 3 people need to be involved, and then that's where technology starts to come into place if we have an event. And this is where Lee and I have had extensive conversations.
If I was to ask you, what do you typically recommend? What are the most frequent things that you would recommend that's like, here's where you're going to get your best bang for the buck?
That's a great question. And again, we look back at those 4 points. There's a lot of things schools can do, like the chief just mentioned, that don't cost anything, such as the intelligence sharing. There's so many assets that are available. The state has applications that people can submit anonymous reports if someone is thinking of doing any harm or they get wind of anything on social media. So there's a lot of free things that can be done.
And you're bringing that stuff to the attention of your clients and say, here's some stuff right here that you have available to you that you should definitely take advantage of.
And more so than that, what we found after Sandy Hook, we went out to schools and they just didn't know where to turn. They had all these vendors calling them saying, I can do this, but they didn't really have that complete package. So we went out and we're still offering this statewide, what we call a TTVA, a Technical Threat Vulnerability Assessment. So we've done about 150 of those since Sandy Hook, been very effective. We actually send one of our techs out to the district. We assess really what they have in place, not just from technology, but from policy, procedure. A lot of schools don't know how many different components of response they have in place, of hardening they have in place. So we help them realize that and how we can make all the different components work with each other. Everyone's out there to replace, rip out, start from scratch, but we know budgets are tight. We can't afford to do that. So if we can start with a free assessment, see what they have, see what can be reused, how we can make it all work together, and then let's look for funding sources.
Yep.
A lot of schools don't realize how easy it is to really acquire different funding. You know, we talk about state aid all the time, working with your local BOCES policies. We talk about smart bond and how to apply for that. We even have someone in-house now that does smart bond applications because of the complexity of it. Well, I travel around the country, and I have to say, here in New York, the amount of resources that we have available to us is tremendous. We have smaller school districts. We're able to get things accomplished. When we go to other states such as Florida, where we have county-wide districts, it's much harder to accomplish things. You have 300-400 buildings trying to all get together and say, we want to do X. Here in New York, we have more power to do things like that.
I can imagine in your previous position as the police chief of the county of Nassau, you had, what, 53 school districts?
56.
56? I can't imagine how many schools are within that 56. That had to be a really, really complicated position. Moreover, turnover among people in those schools. You know, you're talking about awareness of what you have available to you. Well, that's fine and dandy as long as the team stays in place. But as soon as the principal takes a job elsewhere, or the custodian goes somewhere else, or somebody else, or the police chief changes, now you got to have a retraining program. I suspect you did a lot of that.
That's very true, and a word kind of comes to mind when you talk about those dynamics, and that's standardization. What we want to do is create a system, a methodology that is standardized, so that if you do have people changing roles, that it's in place and it's easy to follow. That's something that we worked on in Nassau County, and I'm working on now in Southampton, working with vendors like Lee from a perspective of a first responder. You know, we talked a moment ago about target hardening, then we talked about information sharing. If we move to the third step, which would be, okay, these two failed for some reason, and now we have an intruder, we have a disruption, it's ongoing. We're sending officers to the scene. We're en route. What we want to do then is have as much information in real time as we can possibly get, so that that first responder can save critical seconds and move towards that target and mitigate the situation. So one of the things that I worked with Intralogic is the availability of the closed-circuit TV networks that exist in most schools, not all, but in most. And I looked at that and said, boy, it would be so advantageous if we had access to that, and if our dispatcher could be looking at that as that first responder is arriving on scene, as he's driving on scene, to be told, we see a shooter, we see a suspicious person, he's on the second floor, he's heading north in the building, he just went downstairs, he's in the library now, and you're not even there yet. And you have this information as you arrive, as opposed to, I get there, what door do I go in, how do I go in, where is this person, people are running at me, giving me information, maybe accurate, maybe not accurate. Now I have this critical information streaming into my ears as I'm responding, and even while I'm in the building, I'm getting further instruction as I'm moving through. And we've even discussed, it would be nice maybe to have that available to the actual officer, but probably that officer wants to be focused on his or her surroundings, and have that come in through their ears from somebody else who is looking at the system and guiding him. So we've worked extensively on that, and Lee has been able to deliver that to a number of police departments across the state, myself included. We think it's a great leg up. And there's other components that can be added on to that. But that's, in my mind, one of the most critical things if we have a response.
So here I am, I'm on a school board. I got to make sure that my schools are safe, that my community believes we're doing everything we can to make sure that these are safe. I have a budget to pass come May. I have a variety of competing interests. What are the hardest decisions I'm going to have to make in the next few months?
Well, I think the biggest thing is getting the board and getting the community to calm down as much as they can, because everyone's reacting to what just happened. I attended about 15 board meetings after the Parkland event, where the board asked me to come in to speak to the community and tell them about, hey, we've been doing this for years. And I think it's important to let the community know we've been talking about security for many, many years before Sandy Hook. And I think the assessment is huge, because when we go out and do these free assessments, it helps the school district show the community, look at what kind of shape we're in. A lot of people don't realize, they hear everyone else talking online. You have all these forums where the PTAs are talking and the families are talking, and no one realizes we're in pretty good shape. We got good policies, good procedures, and let's, rather than rushing and spending money and earmarking all this budget to put additional technology, and let's spend that time to coordinate and plan. So the best thing I could recommend to any school board member is get an assessment done. It's free.
Yep.
Let's see where you're at, and I think you've been much better shape than you think you are, and let the community know that.
So as a leader of a school board, bring the temperature down a little bit. Let's have some rational discussions about what practically we can do, what really matters. We are not, it could what happened in Parkland or Sandy could happen anywhere.
Correct.
But we are talking about it now, and we're putting in preventative measures. Anything you would add to that?
I would suggest you invite your police chief or police chief's representative to attend that conversation. Find out what he or she is concerned about. Find out how your different networks will operate together. Talk about the police chief's wants and needs. Some you may be able to meet, some you may not.
Right.
But have an understanding of what would be the maximum efficiency and how close can we get to that. Sometimes you can get all the way there, sometimes you get halfway there. But at least you know and prioritize things in conjunction with your local law enforcement so that you're working as a team. It's critical.
In the old days, the educators and the principal never wanted that police car out front. Oh, what's going on there? Calls would start in, must be something. Now, we'd like to have the police car out front. It shows that we're
an officer in every school.
All the time.
That's right, yeah, right. Which brings me to another question about school resource officers. We're getting tons and tons of questions about whether or not that's a good thing. I know what we, as an organization who represent local decision makers, want to have options available. And if a school community feels a school resource officer is a good option for them, then they should have that option. They're going to have to pay for it, but they should have that option. And we should try to make that as available as possible. Then the question is, well, should that school resource officer be armed or not? What's you guys' take on school resource officers?
I think the more resources you have, the better. But I think it's more of a comprehensive approach. I think that's one tool in the tool belt. And like we talked about during our presentation, it's a multi-pronged approach. And I think if that's one of the tools, you want to have as many tools in your tool belt as possible.
Yep.
You never know what the circumstance that's going to come in is going to bring. You know, we look at what just happened a few weeks ago in Maryland, where they had a full-time school resource officer, and they were able to respond quickly, mitigate the situation. But then we look at a scenario like Parkland. So it's different situations. I personally think it's another tool in the tool belt if you can afford it.
When we talk about difficult decisions for school boards to be making, one of the questions that is coming up is, to what extent do we hire a school resource officer, maybe more than one, and then should they be armed? Should they be armed? What do you think, Chief?
Well, you know, there's a number of varieties when you talk school resource officer. You can have a sworn police officer as a school resource officer. He or she may be there all the time, or he or she may be a liaison to that school and be there part-time. And you may have a private individual who may be retired law enforcement or retired military who may be armed, and then you may have a private one who is not armed. So I really think that, I don't think there is a one particular answer to that question. I think each school district needs to contemplate that and look at their climate. They have to feel out their residents, they have to feel out their PTA, they have to have an understanding and a good dialogue with their police department to see how the police department feels about it. Individual police chiefs and police departments are going to have different thoughts about that. What I think is really important is that you're on the same page. I don't think you want to have that armed guard in your school and have a chief who's really opposed to that. And if you do have an armed guard, I think you want to make darn sure that that armed guard is known to the police department, that there's been some training, some interagency training with the school district and with the police department, so that if you have an event, there's going to be a seamless action to approach that event. So I think the most important thing is have that conversation with your police chief, assess your needs in your community, and if you're going in that direction, to make sure that you have good training and a good understanding of how you're going to operate together.
Well, I'm not placing a value judgment on armed or unarmed, but what I have heard as the benefits of a school resource officer is really relationship development with kids. Eyes and ears. Is some kid having trouble? Somebody's willing to report somebody, hey, I want you to take a look at this one. Keep an eye on that kid. He's having issues. I heard something. And so they're kind of this collection, and that's their job.
Yes.
You know, placing this all on teachers and principals who may not be trained.
much.
But it may be too much, and they may lose sight. But if I have a school resource officer whose job is, and I might only have 10 kids in this school that I'm kind of keeping my eye on, to me, that looks like a good benefit.
Well, we came right back around to where we were a moment ago. We can talk about all kinds of technologies and all kinds of responses, but you just talked more about information sharing again.
There you go.
And I think information sharing is critical, and IT comes into information sharing, and people on the property come into that as well. So having a school resource officer there will encourage that information sharing, will give students a place to go. If there's no place else in the school, they know they can talk to a cop. And it opens a dialogue. You know, we as you mentioned before, years ago, there was a stigma to police on campus was a problem.
Yep.
Uh-oh, what's going on?
Yep.
They didn't want to necessarily see my police car.
Right.
But today, we're trying to break down those walls. We're trying to be more communicative with the children and the students in the school. We're trying to develop those liaisons so we can identify the people that you just spoke of. And they're known. The students know who the problem students are.
Yeah.
They always have, they always will.
You heard that in Parkland.
Yep,
Absolutely.
I mean, kid after kid after kid came back and said the perpetrator was well known to them from middle school age.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Teachers, probably the most controversial proposal coming forward at all was arming teachers. Is that a good idea?
I have to say, on a personal level, I'm very, very cautious of that. I wouldn't say that I'm totally against it, but I probably lean a little in that direction. I think you're coming to school as a teacher, you should be focused on teaching. That should be your priority. I don't like the idea of making school security a teacher's responsibility. It's possible as we go forward in time, maybe there's a way to introduce that, but my gut instinct says probably not the best idea.
So we've talked a lot about target hardening and the importance of that, and a little bit about this target softening. I'm hearing more about that. And this idea of softening is really paying attention to the mental and emotional state, social and emotional well-being of kids, because there are going to be those kids who are showing some signs that they might have some tendencies that could eventually manifest themselves into a dangerous situation.
I think I'll steal one of the chief's lines that he always says, there's always smoke before the fire.
Yeah.
And it's so true. I use that all the time. And it's very true. You find all these events, there's some information that we got, some information sharing, whether it's internally in the school, whether it's a social worker or a guidance counselor knowing a little bit, or another student just seeing something's not right with another student.
Yeah.
Or social media. Social media is our biggest friend and our worst enemy.
Yeah.
Like the chief stated before, one of the things we find a lot of schools having us do now is monitor social media, because there's no easy way of doing that. So now we monitor it for them. You know, you have Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter. People are constantly posting things, and it's really that proactive step. If you can really see that information ahead of time, get that out to law enforcement, get that out to the social workers in the school. I've had, just the other day, I had a perfect example of someone posted online and they said, I'm going to the gym so I can get big guns. The word guns populated on our system, and we obviously know that's a false positive, but we're able to bring that information to the social worker, to the superintendent, to the facility staff, and let them know what's going on so they can mitigate and intervene.
Well, and I've heard the stories of one of the students posts something, I'm going to kill myself, or I'm going to do something harmful to others in the school, and somebody picks up on that, alerts the appropriate people, they go to the home, or they somehow go talk to the parents, and the parents go, what are you kidding? No, that not my daughter, no, that she'd never do anything. There it is.
Yeah.
And wow, big surprise.
We have several cases like that ongoing right now, and we've developed a policy in my department where if that kind of information comes to our attention, we want to move on that rapidly. So we assign a detective to that case right away. Before school opens and the next school day, we want to intervene, want to interview the child, we want to interview the parents, we want to assess whether or not this threat, if it's in the form of a threat or some action, is actually, if the individual is capable of carrying that out. Now, you should be, and I'm sure you are aware, that about 2 or 3 years ago, New York State enacted a law called Making a Terrorist Threat. So if a child is doing this with the intent and purpose to disrupt an entire school program, to close school for the day, to cause a significant response from law enforcement or other type of hysteria in the community, that person is violating the law. And one of the messages I just spoke to some superintendents last week was, you need to educate, and this is important for your listeners, your educators right now. They need to educate their students to understand that law. It's a very serious law. If you are going on the website and putting it out to everybody in the school, I'm coming to school tomorrow and I'm going to shoot this school up, you are making a terrorist threat. It's a felony, it's a serious crime. On the other hand, when we investigate these things, sometimes we find out that it was just a message shared between two people. It wasn't out to the general public, so it was not going to garner any mass concern or mass disruption, but I just simply send it to Lee, and Lee tells his father, if he's a student, and his father calls the police, and now we intervene and we find out I'm a troubled person. And now we can get that person some psychological or psychiatric help. And we're doing that in more cases than not. We've had several that move towards an arrest, but we probably have in the area of 75 or 80% of those cases seem to be where a child is needing some kind of guidance, some, as you call it, softening.
If we had done everything you wanted us to do, both from a law enforcement perspective, a technology perspective, I now assume I have the perfect situation in my school. What's that look like?
I think there's no such thing as a perfect situation.
So I can't have 100% confidence.
You can't have 100%, but we want to try to do as much as we can. And what I find is a lot of schools do pieces of it. And they say, well, I put cameras in, or I put this greeter at the door. Again, it's that four-prong approach. You got to do a little bit of everything and be prepared for it. There's a reason why no one has died in a fire in a school since 1956. And the reason for that is we're properly prepared, trained, organized. We want to do the same with active shooter situations. We want, again, that four-prong approach. Harden the facility to the best of our capabilities, from software, from partnership with law enforcement, from technology. We want to have the intelligence, monitor social media, use services like what Intralogic offers, use services on your own to monitor social media, monitor what's going on, the beat of the school district, what's happening within the school. Know what the response is going to look like. Partner with your law enforcement. Know what that response is going to be like. How can we make it as efficient as possible? How can we collaboratively join forces with the police department to make that response easy? And train, train, and train again. If you do all four of those multifaceted approaches, a multi-pronged approach, you're really going to secure the school to the best of your capabilities.
Anything you would add to that, sir?
He summed it up quite well, actually. Those four pieces are the four pieces you concentrate
That's
on.
the checklist.
Yeah.
So
it comes in various levels.
Sure.
If you can't get all the way to the top,
Right.
at least get halfway there.
Right. But it is, you've given us a good guide. The people who are watching this hopefully are writing down notes and saying, okay, so to what extent are we doing this sort of thing? Hopefully they will have an opportunity to reach out to their local law enforcement, perhaps out to Intralogic. I think that you guys have provided us with extraordinarily good information here in a very timely period when this is what school boards are talking about. We're going to have to do something here to make sure that we have the safest schools possible. Lee Mendel, Chief Stephen Skrynacki, it is such a pleasure to have you here with us. We really do appreciate it. Perhaps we'll get a chance to get back together again sometime under better circumstances, when everybody is safe and sound, and we haven't had a school shooting in a long, long time.
That'd be nice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to my two guests for discussing this very important topic of keeping our schools safe and secure. I will see you next time on another edition of Newsmakers.